June 1942. Tobruk has fallen. Rommel stands at the edge of Egypt, closer to Cairo than any Axis commander will ever be. His tanks are 30 miles from Alexandria. British High Command is burning documents. The Nile Delta, the Suez Canal, the entire Middle East is within reach. And then his panzers stop. Not because of British guns, not because of a counterattack. They stop because they have no fuel. Rommel radios Berlin. He begs Mussolini. He pleads with his own staff. But the ships carrying his gasoline are at the bottom of the Mediterranean. His ammunition is 2,000 miles away. His greatest enemy isn't across the sand, it's behind him. What do you do when the enemy isn't across the battlefield, but 2,000 miles behind you, deciding whether your tanks move tomorrow or become steel coffins in the sand? This is the story of how the most brilliant tactician of World War II was defeated by something no amount of genius could outmaneuver. Not firepower, not strategy, logistics. You've heard of Rommel's daring flanking maneuvers, his lightning strikes across the desert. But what you haven't heard is how every one of those victories pushed him further from survival and closer to collapse. Because in North Africa, the war wasn't won by the general who fought best. It was won by the side that could supply the fight. By the end, you'll understand why Rommel's greatest battle was never against the British. It was against the sea, the distance, and time itself. Brilliance met mathematics and lost. The North African campaign was never supposed to be Germany's war. It started as a favor. Mussolini's Italian army had collapsed in Libya. Britain was pushing toward Tripoli. Hitler, already planning his invasion of Russia, sent a small mechanized force to stabilize the front, just enough to keep Italy in the fight. He sent Erwin Rommel. Within weeks, Rommel had done the impossible. He reversed the collapse, pushed the British back across Cyrenaica, seized Benghazi, reached the Egyptian border. He did it with 2 understrength divisions, captured British fuel, and a tactical instinct that turned every engagement into a masterclass. The world called him the Desert Fox. But the desert is unforgiving, and North Africa is not Europe. The theater stretched over 1,400 miles of barren wasteland. There were no factories, no railroads worth mentioning, no infrastructure. Every bullet, every gallon of fuel, every spare part, every ration, everything had to be shipped from Europe, unloaded at Tripoli or Benghazi, and then trucked across hundreds of miles of sand and rock. And that journey began with a single fragile crossing, the Mediterranean Sea. For Rommel's Afrika Korps to fight, convoys had to survive a 300-mile gauntlet between Italy and Libya. British submarines prowled the routes. RAF bombers struck from Malta, a tiny island fortress sitting directly astride the supply lanes. Every convoy that sailed was a gamble. Every tanker that sank was a battle Rommel could no longer fight. The British knew this. While Rommel maneuvered brilliantly on land, the Royal Navy and RAF waged a quieter, more patient war. Not against his tanks, but against his logistics. They didn't need to destroy the Afrika Korps in battle. They just needed to starve it. Every mile Rommel advanced felt like victory. But on the supply maps in London, it looked like suicide. And Rommel knew it too. In his private letters, he warned Berlin. He begged for more supplies. He calculated fuel consumption down to the liter. He captured British depots not for glory, but for gasoline. His entire operational strategy began to revolve not around enemy positions, but around supply dumps. By mid-1942, Rommel had pushed deep into Egypt. He had won every major engagement. He stood closer to the Suez Canal than any Axis force ever would. But his supply line now stretched over 1,200 miles, and the Mediterranean was becoming a graveyard. British intelligence was learning something dangerous. Rommel's genius made him predictable. Every victory pushed him further from his ports. Every advance consumed fuel he couldn't replace. Every mile closer to Cairo was a mile deeper into a logistical trap. Rommel didn't know it yet, but he had already lost the war. He just hadn't run out of fuel yet. If this turning point surprised you, take a moment to mark it. Now back to the battle. Summer 1942. Rommel is winning, on paper. He's shattered the British Eighth Army at Gazala, captured 33,000 prisoners, taken the fortress of Tobruk in a single day, a humiliation so severe that Churchill learns of it while in Washington, calling it one of the heaviest blows of the war. Rommel is promoted to field marshal on the battlefield. Hitler is ecstatic. Mussolini flies to Libya with a white horse, ready for a victory parade through Cairo. But Rommel's quartermasters are terrified. The Afrika Korps has 300 operational tanks. They need 30,000 tons of supplies per month to sustain offensive operations. In June, only 16,000 tons arrive. In July, less than 5,000. The math is simple, brutal, undeniable. Rommel radios his supply officers. How much fuel do we have? The answer comes back. Enough for 300 kilometers of movement, total. Cairo is 400 kilometers away. But Rommel doesn't stop. He can't. Momentum is everything in desert warfare. If he halts, the British will dig in, reinforce, rebuild. He calculates that if he reaches the Nile Delta, he can seize British fuel depots and resupply from captured stocks, just as he's done before. It's a gamble, but it's the only card he has left. He orders the advance. First week of July. The Afrika Korps crosses into Egypt and slams into British defenses at a rail stop called El Alamein. It's not a major fortification, just a 30-mile gap between the sea and the Qattara Depression, an impassable salt marsh. But it's narrow, and for the first time, the British can't be flanked. Rommel attacks anyway. His panzers push forward and then sputter to a halt. Literally. Fuel trucks haven't arrived. Entire battalions are stranded in the open, waiting for gasoline that's still in Italy, or at the bottom of the sea. German tankers report they're running on fumes. Artillery units ration shells. Supply columns are bombed by the RAF before they even reach the front. And then the intelligence reports start coming in. British convoys are unloading at Alexandria. Thousands of tons. American-made Sherman tanks. Fresh divisions from India, Australia, South Africa. The British aren't retreating anymore. They're massing. Rommel tries again and again. Small, desperate attacks, probing for weakness. But every thrust consumes fuel he can't replace. His tank strength drops to 200, then 150. His units under strength. And the British aren't even counterattacking. They're just waiting. And then everything changed. By August, it wasn't the machines collapsing anymore. It was the men. Rommel flies to Berlin. He doesn't want a medal. He wants fuel, spare parts, reinforcements. He meets with Hitler and lays out the mathematics of his collapse. He needs 50,000 tons of supplies per month to hold his position. He's receiving less than 10,000. He has fuel for perhaps 3 days of sustained combat. His men are sick with dysentery. His vehicles are breaking down faster than they can be repaired. Hitler listens, promises support, tells him the Luftwaffe will protect the convoys, tells him to hold. Rommel returns to Africa and watches his supply situation worsen. In September, Axis convoys lose 40% of their cargo to British interdiction. In October, over 50%. Tankers are sunk within sight of Tobruk. Ammunition ships explode before they reach port. The Luftwaffe, stripped for the Eastern Front, can barely contest the skies. One German officer writes in his diary, "We are not fighting the British. We are fighting distance." At the front, the reality is visceral. Panzer crews dig their tanks into the sand, not to create defensive positions, but to save fuel. Mechanics cannibalize broken vehicles for parts. Soldiers survive on half rations. Italian divisions, even worse supplied, begin to disintegrate. And across the line, the British 8th Army grows stronger every day. New commander, Bernard Montgomery. Methodical, cautious, unglamorous. But he has something Rommel doesn't: time and supplies. Montgomery doesn't need to outthink Rommel. He just needs to outlast him. October 23, 1942, 9:40 p.m. 1,000 British guns open fire at El Alamein. The barrage lasts 5 hours. It's the largest artillery bombardment in the North African campaign. The earth shakes. The sky glows orange. The Second Battle of El Alamein has begun. Rommel isn't even there. He's in Austria on medical leave, suffering from exhaustion and jaundice. When the call comes, he flies back immediately, lands in the desert, takes command of a force that's already broken. He has 500 tanks. Montgomery has over 1,000. He has fuel for perhaps 100 kilometers of movement. The British have fuel depots stretching back to the Nile. He radios Berlin. Either we receive supplies immediately or the army will be destroyed. No supplies come. Rommel tries to maneuver. His panzers move into position and run out of fuel mid-battle. Units become isolated. Counterattacks stall. The British press forward, slowly, methodically, grinding down resistance. Italian divisions, starved of fuel and ammunition, surrender en masse. On November 2nd, Rommel signals a retreat. Hitler responds with a direct order: victory or death, not one step back. Rommel reads the message, pauses, then ignores it. He orders the withdrawal anyway, because staying means annihilation. The Afrika Korps begins its long retreat, 1,200 miles back across the desert, back past Tobruk, back past Benghazi, back toward Tunisia. They leave behind 30,000 prisoners, 500 tanks, 400 guns. And Rommel finally understands the truth. He was never fighting Montgomery. He was fighting the Mediterranean, the distance, the shipping manifests, the fuel consumption charts. He was fighting a war he couldn't win, no matter how brilliant he was. El Alamein wasn't just a battle. It was a breaking point. For the first time in the war, a German army had been decisively defeated in open combat. Churchill would later say, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." But the real victory wasn't won at El Alamein. It was won in the shipping lanes, in the dockyards of Tripoli, in the fuel depots that never filled, in the convoy manifests that showed ship after ship at the bottom of the sea. The British hadn't just outfought Rommel, they had outsupplied him. While the Afrika Korps starved, the 8th Army received steady reinforcements. Spare parts flowed freely. Fuel was abundant. Montgomery could afford to be cautious, because he knew time was on his side. Rommel, meanwhile, had been forced into a strategic paradox. Every attack consumed resources he couldn't replace, but staying defensive meant slow death by attrition. He had chosen brilliance, aggression, the bold stroke, and it had killed him. The retreat from El Alamein became a rout. The Afrika Korps fell back across Libya, abandoning positions it had held for 2 years. Tobruk fell without a fight. Benghazi was evacuated. By January 1943, Rommel was in Tunisia, trapped between Montgomery advancing from the east and the Americans landing in the west. In March 1943, Rommel left Africa for the last time. Recalled to Germany, exhausted, sick, beaten. The Afrika Korps would surrender 2 months later. 250,000 Axis troops became prisoners, more than were captured at Stalingrad. The Axis lost the North African campaign because they couldn't deliver supplies across 300 miles of hostile sea. The Allies won because they could. It was that simple, that absolute. Modern militaries study Rommel's campaigns obsessively, not for his tactics, but for his mistakes. Because the lesson is eternal. Wars are not won by the best general. They are won by the side that can sustain the fight. If preserving real history matters to you, subscribe for future stories told without spectacle. Here's what history often overlooks. Rommel knew he was going to lose. Not after El Alamein, not after the retreat. He knew in June 1942, at the moment of his greatest triumph. In his personal letters, written just days after capturing Tobruk, Rommel calculated his odds. He measured distances, fuel consumption, convoy schedules, and he concluded that unless the Luftwaffe could neutralize Malta and secure the sea lanes, the campaign was doomed. He wrote to his wife, "We are trying to do the impossible with insufficient means." He told his staff officers the same. He warned Berlin. He even suggested withdrawing to a defensible line closer to his supply ports. But Hitler wouldn't hear it. Mussolini demanded Cairo. The propaganda machine had already declared victory. And so Rommel, the tactical genius, was forced to fight a war he knew was unwinnable. The tragedy isn't that he lost. The tragedy is that he was brilliant enough to see it coming and powerless to stop it. Because the real decision-making power wasn't in his hands. It was in Rome, in Berlin, in the convoy routes no general could control. Rommel's nightmare wasn't the British Army. It was the realization that courage, skill, and genius mean nothing when the fuel runs dry. The Desert Fox didn't lose because he made a mistake. He lost because the war he was ordered to fight could never be won. And somewhere, deep in the logistics offices of the British Admiralty, quiet men with shipping manifests had already decided his fate, long before the first shot was ever fired. If this story connects, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Did someone in your family serve in the war? The desert is silent now. The tanks are gone. The supply convoys have stopped. The Afrika Korps is a memory, but the lesson remains. In war, the loudest explosions aren't always the most important. Sometimes the decisive moment happens in a convoy office, in a fuel calculation, in a ship that never arrives. Rommel fought like a lion, but he was chained to an impossible equation. And in the end, logistics, cold, invisible, relentless, decided everything. But in the sand he left behind, another general found something Rommel never had: unlimited supply. And it would decide the war.